Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of CTO Confidential. I'm here today with Pete Sacco, who is an entrepreneur and investor and mystic, as you described to me before, building the bridge between human consciousness and AI and the machines that we need to power it. Pete, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Mike. Let me just, I'll start. I want to correct it a little bit. The bridge. There's two technologies that are going to dominate this century. One of them we already know. That's AI, artificial intelligence. The other technology that's going to dominate, though, is going to be us. We are beings of human discernment, where AI is the machine that's going to take care of optimization, of pattern recognition, of cognition, far beyond our wildest dreams. It does not know how to make meaning. It does not know judgment. It doesn't know how to make a decision in the absence of data or in the presence of conflicting data. But we do. Think about every major decision you've ever made. We make it by feeling our way through the right answer, not just by a spreadsheet. That's what really the bridge is.
That's amazing because you know what? I had a problem just before we got on today, and I'll give you a great example. I have we build software, websites, web applications. I'm building an application. I have a spec in the ticket and I have a Figma design. And I kind of bring my agent together and I say, here's the spec, here's the Figma, I want you to build it. Well, the spec differed from the Figma and it noted the difference, but it really didn't know what to do with it. And it was really me who had to say, the spec is wrong, the Figma's wrong, or I have to blend these two things together in some way. Now, some models get good at this inference, and I think that's what you hear when people are like, oh, I was so amazed by what it did. But it's not consistent. Sometimes you'll be amazed, and other times you're like, no, you're out of your damn mind.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. I mean, even with, being really, really good with agentic workflow and even with vibe coding, I still find, that we need to do the 10% preamble work. The 80% can be done by the machines. And then the final 10% is that, the things like security and scale and stuff like that. The things that, again, the meaning behind things, the judgment behind things. Look, where we need to develop in humanity, where we need to go with humanity is, will we develop the wisdom fast enough as to where to point the machines, as to what problems to solve? And that's what it's really going to come down to. In fact, I'm exploring that very topic in my forthcoming book, which I'm just about done writing, maybe another few months worth of work, but I'm not going to self-publish this one. I think it's it's called Freed for What? The question mark. And so freed for what? And so the idea behind it is that mankind has been shaped by the technology as wrought. And each stage we have opened a crack a little bit wider as to what our capabilities are. We've unburdened ourselves for something. But now in the realm of it, but at the same time, in every other technology, and I run through what I think are the primal ones: fire, agriculture, writing, printing, electricity, the Industrial Revolution, and then eventually the internet, computers, the internet, and AI. And in every single time we created a new crack, we've also created a cage. We've created a prison for ourselves that we didn't expect, right? And so the idea, though, is, to me, the real leap of faith that I'm going to make. Everything else I root in the history and the technology and what actually happened. But in the end, what I'm saying is that, when machines began to think for us, we thought that that was everything. But what we didn't realize that there's two pieces to thinking, right? There is the setup to have the insight. Now, we think thinking is the massaging of the spreadsheet, the comparing of the tables, the comparing of the notes, the getting ready to have insight. But that's the very stuff that the machine does well. The insight comes from us, the discernment, the judgment, the meaning, to be able to say, oh, this is why this works. This is what we should be solving. And we're going to learn that there needs to be, and there will be, a symbiotic relationship between machine and human, because they are distinctly different technologies. That's the two technology framework that I evolved with The Bridge, the ebook The Bridge, and now I'm following it through in the full-fledged book, Freed for What.
I love the title, The Freed for What, because, this is, and we're having a great conversation at a great time, because I tell people that I have this, I've been working on a piece, because we're going to be doing a print magazine ourselves called Silicon Island. But the piece that I've been working on is called Fear and Loathing in the Age of AI. That's the title, because I said, I wake up and some days I'm so optimistic and other days I'm so down on the tech, because it reminds me a little bit of, and we've all heard about this, the person who pursued wealth and riches beyond their wildest dreams, only to find themselves immensely unhappy when they finally got there. And I worry sometimes. And again, it's not all the time. It's like a fleeting kind of like a feeling that comes and washes over you. That's this, you've taken away programming from me. You've made me more powerful than I've ever been. But am I going to end up happier at the end of that? Freed for what, right? So a lot of folks, we talk about this loss of purpose. And now there are always people that jump in the thread. I want to just separate this out. The people who are working the dead end job, who are absolutely miserable, this is not what I'm talking about.
No.
I'm talking about the people who do derive purpose from the thing that they do, and they really do love it. And that's now been stripped from them. And so what do we gain? And I the title kind of resonates in this way, because it's freed for what?
Well, dude,
Did I win?
You don't know how much you're helping me right now, because I'm actually right in the throes of answering that very question in the AI section, right? Because that is the one that gets the innovator, the creator. That's the one that's keeping them up at night. Look, I've identified my self-worth for 1,000 years on how smart I think I am, what my skills are, and how much I could sell that for in the marketplace. And I'm about to see that evaporate. But you know what? If you actually track the history of technology, that has always been the case. And so we've always lost our meaning, right? But we've also opened up a Pandora's box. I call it the cage at the same time. The answer is human beings have come in here. Let me give you a small example that I lay out historically in the box. Everybody had heard of the Luddites, right? When the weavers took over, mastery of human weaving was done by people, and then we invented the loom, right? And then, they went in there in the middle of the night and they destroyed the looms with sledgehammers to break them up. Look, that's the, and then I'd like to say, well, then it led to, raising millions of people out of misery and out of poverty. And that is true. But that didn't help you if you were one of the guys losing the job. It didn't help the little 16-year-old boy during the Luddite Revolution that the British government marshaled an army larger than what they fought Napoleon with to put down the Luddites. It didn't help the 16-year-old boy who was hung at 16 years old for just being a lookout for the militia. Right? It didn't help him. And it didn't help, by the way, that once the loom was being made, that was the crack. It unburdened us from labor. But it opened a cage and made us a prisoner. With the story that you don't hear is that as a result of the machines being happened, they built the machines in far off a ways from the city because they knew they were having problems in the city where the weavers were. So they built the loom factories far away. And guess what their labor pool was? Children.
Farmers. Children. Oh.
And that's where child labor came from. So you would say, well, how did we close that cage? It took 30 years for us to master enforcing child labor laws in the world. So look, history is replete with all of these stories. And what I'm trying to do in the new book is to tell the story, the real history, not the glossed over version and not the doomer version. Look, I'm going to be your most optimistic guy. I am the anti-Terminator guy. I am the anti-iRobot, right? I'm the guy who knows that this leads to post-scarcity. But I, for one moment, do not believe that it's going to, right now, we're going to go through the most dystopic time in human history, but it's going to be faster than it's ever been. To get to the other side of post-scarcity. A post-scarcity world where, by the way, labor is virtually free as a result of robotics, and energy is virtually free because of fusion energy. And now look, I'm an ex-theoretical physicist turned electrical engineer who's been designing and building data centers for 30 years, who's a large advocate of plant medicines to realize states of human consciousness, I feel very well suited to be the bridge, to be the guy that stitches together data centers, energy, and AI, but the real technology of human consciousness. And I know that we are destined for greatness because the doomers have been wrong for 500 years.
Yep. Yep. I will say this, that I forget where I saw it, but they said it was some kind of a video, but the basic premise was this: everybody has always thought that the end of the world was coming at all these times in history, right? When the barbarians were taking over the Romans, I'm sure the people inside Rome thought this is the end of the world. And the world has managed to limp forward and make it, and no matter what, we kind of always go for it. And I think that I like the optimistic approach, which I never really thought is, even though this might bring a lot of pain, the speed actually might make that pain relatively quick. The path out of it is going to be.
I don't want to lose that thread, because here's the leap of faith that I make. In every other time in history, it has been man who's risen to the challenge. It was man who finally realized, hey, we can't put kids to work. That's dangerous. They fall in the loom. It's dangerous. We can't do that. We have to have child labor laws to protect them. And the greater part of humanity said, yes, of course we need to do that. I didn't even know you were doing that. That's horrendous. Yes, labor laws, child labor laws. Okay, that was humans. My argument is that in the world where we have questioned now the loss of meaning, it is going to be here. I'll give you an example. Social media. Social media, we're saying right now that social media is destroying our children. Jonathan Haidt wrote his book, The Anxious Generation, or whatever Jonathan's book was. It was fantastic, highly read, right? But it was rebutted just as quickly to say that, look, yes, the kid, we're losing our attention because, it knows exactly what we want. But there's been study after study after study showing that the algorithm isn't showing us what it thinks we want to see. It is us that is saying, this is what I want to consume. And it just reads the tea leaves and it just feeds us that stuff. Now, here's where the leap of faith. In the past, it would have taken humans to say, look, I really didn't mean to look at that. Maybe don't stop looking at it. I shouldn't be ingesting that information. I think the machines are going to understand what we're looking at is not actually what we should be consuming, not in a police state kind of way, but look, Pete, you're better than that. That little voice that's inside our head that talks to us right before we have that 13th drink and we get, and we're too far gone, I think the machines are going to become that little voice for us. And by the way, your generation is getting easier. I'm 59 years old, right? My guys, my peers, they're rounding third base and getting ready to slide into home. They're done, except for this guy, right? But the
Right.
younger generation, they're going to trust the machines. And when the machines say, hey, that reel that you just saw, that's not really the truth of what actually happened. Here's the real story about the data. And I get it. 6 times more people are talking about the made up story on this. But the reality is this: maybe you should be rethinking your position. And guess what? They're going to trust that. We're going to trust that. And it's going to be the first time in human history that the machines are causal for improving humans. And that is what's going to lead to the symbiotic relationship between man and human, the
That's very
optimizer
interesting.
and the discernment engine.
It's interesting because I find myself very much intentionally, because I know, I guess maybe based on education and what I know, I intentionally try to expose myself to other opinions, where I'm like, oh, let me look at this, let me look at that, and let me try and challenge my own assumptions. And I think that's
Yes.
something that school will teach kids too. I think that as we start teaching kids how to use AI, it's going to be a lot less of, hey, you probably don't need to memorize this specific thing. You'll be able to get it from the machine. But what you do need to be able to do is kind of interrogate the scenario and know kind of when things are right and wrong. And I want to say it comes down to simple scenarios. I mean, I want to bring up a super simple scenario. I added too much shock to a blow up hot tub I had in the backyard the other day. And like I added it, I'm watching, it looks super cloudy. I go, something seems kind of wrong with this. It smells, you know? So I, of course, asked the machine. It goes, you added way, how much did you add? I go, I added
Yeah,
one,
right.
you
Yeah, right.
added way too much. I just, I didn't, I did the typical thing. I should have asked the machine first. But then I was working with the machine for how do I get the water out of this thing now? Because I couldn't drain it into the lawn. And so then I'm like, maybe I get it into the pool. It goes, that's a great idea. But I couldn't get the hose up. It's like, can you get a sub pump? I'm like, no, I don't have a sub pump. I was like, I'm not going to go out and get a sub pump. What about, I go, I do have a dry well. And so we're going back and forth and we finally figured out how to drain this thing.
There
But
you
it was
go.
this amazing antagonist, like it was sort of this back and forth between myself and the machine. And then I
No,
also
no,
tested it against another LLM because I go, I want to kind of
there you
know if
go.
I'm getting the right info. And I think kids need to learn that type of technique too.
But it wasn't antagonistic. It was symbiotic. You solved the problem way faster than you wouldn't have. What would we have done in the past? I'd have called Uncle Jim. He's got there. Oh, but Uncle Jim's in the mountains. I can't get him. All right, who else do I know who'd fix it? I sought out an expert. That's the point. But that expert used to be a human. That expert is no longer a human. We actually trained that thing on all of human knowledge. And oh, by the way, let's remember, if human knowledge was wrong, so is the LLM. It's
Right.
getting better at recognizing when it's wrong. I'm actually testing that in the book. I'm taking a whole bunch of axioms, things that we thought we believed, because here's what was said about it. And I'm actually writing the real story as to, well, what you believed about the Enigma machine, for instance, in World War II, wasn't quite the whole story. The whole
Mm,
story of the Enigma machine was a whole different machine that we actually solved for, which, by the way, which was done with the first digital computer, which was so secretly done that they destroyed it and swore everybody to secrecy for the next 30 years. So they had actually
wow.
designed the digital version of the machine that solved the Enigma long before, but it was destroyed. But again, we didn't tell that story because that story they felt was too dangerous, right? Look, I can't wait. I'm so deep in the data right now, as to presenting it. But I am forever convinced, or more fervently convinced now, of the symbiotic relationship that is going to exist between human and machine as a result of this. And that this is not the moment in time where it destroys us. It is the moment in time where it is going to complete us. It indeed, I am describing AI repeatedly as the mirror because it is just reflective of us.
It's interesting too because when it comes to even learning, I was having this moment. I've been building this library for my workflows in AI, and I decided I wanted to hand code a bunch of it because I letting the AI do it. I just like felt like I wasn't moving. It sounds weird, but it wasn't moving slow enough for me to get into it where it was coming out the way I wanted it to. So I was hand coding. But the funny part is it was dealing with an aspect of programming I don't have a ton of experience in because I was doing a lot of meta programming. And I read the book on meta programming, which is sort of like reading the book on swimming, where now I
Yeah.
have an idea, but I still can't swim.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
And so I said, I put my agent in like a teaching mode. And man, this was like revelatory for me. That was
Yeah.
like, okay, I'm going to still write this because I want to properly learn this before, because then I'm going to be able to direct the machine better. But I've never been able to learn that quickly. And then someone on LinkedIn had commented like, oh, we used to think people needed to learn assembly and now you don't, right? And I said, yeah, but you want to know what? I programmed and I never learned assembly. But with the help of AI, I did because I was like able to actually say like, well, I don't want to have to set up a whole environment and figure this out. AI was able to be a tutor for me. Now, do I need that skill? I actually don't know. And it goes back to what you were saying. I think this is the full circle is I will never get paid to write assembly. What I'm after is I don't know what that learning experience is going to inspire in me. And I think that's what I think about sometimes when folks are like, well, what's the point of learning that? I said, because you learn things and those unique things bring together these weird connections in your brain. And I could think of tons of things that were inspired by historic approaches. Like I know someone who was inspired by small talk, and and they went back and like but the AI allowed them to do a ton of research and learn about small talk that you would not. You would have to read tons of books and white papers and spend all this time doing it. But now you could get practical experience in teaching and learn faster than you've ever been able to learn before.
100%. I wish I don't have it at my fingertips, but there in the book, I'm going to quote the gentleman who did this massive, large scale study, which basically showed that 85% of insight is actually just fact gathering and organization of data. I alluded to this before, and I wish I could cite the gentleman because I feel terrible that I'm referencing his work. And I think when I read this, it was an aha moment for me because I realized he's exactly right. Whenever I have an insight, the insight is usually at the back end of a whole bunch of reading different books, watching different podcasts, doing this, meaning getting that information for me. And it is right now purely human to have the insight to stitch multiple disparate things together to have a moment of clarity that perhaps we can design this, perhaps we can build this, perhaps we can solve that, to have that judgment, to have that moment of discernment. I believe that I love when people come to me and they're like, wow, AI is just going to make us all stupid. Really? I don't know. Look at me. Look at Mike. I knew Mike, I didn't know you before AI, right? But I know that you're a pretty smart freaking dude, and I'm seeing you getting smarter every single day because you're using the tool. I think it's very akin, Mike, to, I just wrote about this in my Substack. There's a famous MIT study just recently came out a year or two ago, and it said that most AI projects at corporate America are failing. And the news just ran with it, and they just said, "See, AI is not getting the return. See, it's a giant bubble." In fact, I've been attacking Ed Zetron on on my YouTube channel because he keeps saying the AI bubble is popping, and I'm like, "Oh, you're only half right, dude. It's about the infrastructure that's in the ground. That's not going anywhere. It's just going to get repriced, reused, and it's going to be the next bastion of everything, just like fiber was back in the .com days." Mm-hmm. Anyway, my point is, God, I went off on a tangent and I lost my whole train of thought. We were just saying, what did we just say?
Well, we were talking about how AI is going to make people smarter. That was the.
Yeah, I forgot where I was going with it.
And you were synthesizing information. You basically you're saying that what we're doing is synthesizing information from like disparate places, and the AI isn't going to do that naturally. And that's exactly what I'm trying to do. And I feel like there's an entire field of art that's incredible when it comes to this, because somebody had produced this incredible art with Midjourney.
Yes.
And then somebody commented on it. They said, "I want to see the prompt," and the artist said, "No." And I was like, that's the secret sauce. Because no matter how hard you try, you were not, unless you copied the image and asked Midjourney to make a copy of this, you would not be able to weave that back into the model. And so then I started getting into this really, really weird kind of space. And maybe I'll just say this because who knows, we'll talk about this a little more too. Like there's now all these different models. And let's say I have a prompt, and that's an artifact that when it went into GPT 4 whatever, 4.0, it produced this piece of art. And so as a part of that piece of art, I kind of saved that. I was like, but then when they deprecate the model, it's like, do we want some kind of a model archive where like an artist is like, no, I'm not done? Because I've experienced this with GPT 5.6 Sol, where I'm not enjoying it. And I went back to 5.5 because all my skills and all my workflows were great on GPT 5.5. And I installed GPT 5.6 Sol, and it just broke my whole flow. So I was like, no, I want to keep this one for a bit. And so now we need like a web archive. Is there something where it's like, hey, I know like as a company, like, please don't deprecate Sonnet, whatever, because I'm using that for this thing.
Hey, look at print photography, right? There's no doubt that we could do anything we want in digital photography, but there's some purists still want to do in print because there was just that I learned not because it was better, faster, easier. It was because that's what they learned on and that's what they enjoy. Why take something away that gives us enjoyment? I'm just saying what I'm saying on a macro scale. AI is going to continue to take away the burden of doing and the burden of thinking, but it is not about to make us less smart. It is about to give us the space to be smarter than we ever were before.
I love it. I love it. And now I want to pivot just a little bit because there's another side of this that you're involved with that I want to make sure we touch on, which is the building of data centers, which is quite contentious, especially in New York where
Yeah.
I am. And I know that's a big deal, but you have a solution, which I believe you said it was the TCU or TPU.
The TSU, the
TSU.
thermodynamic scaling unit. It is by a company called Extropic, Dr. Guillaume Verdun, and he invented the thermodynamic scaling unit. It's basically the Extropic is his brain trust. And here, I'll set it up this way, right? Because this is where we're going. So first of all, data centers maybe are the most misunderstood thing going on right now. They're the scapegoat for the entire AI industry. There is a problem. Don't get me wrong. I've written a lot about this on my Substack, right? About water consumption and power and all of this. And there's ways to do it. But here's the reality. The reality is that we are likely in a bubble. And that bubble is going to have a correction, but a correction is not a collapse, right?
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't mean that all the data centers went away, all the GPUs went away. They're just going to get repriced, reused, and it is going to cause the next evolution, of expansion. Specific to Extropic, though, we keep falling into the same problem over and over of solving tomorrow's problems using today's technology. So outside of what I'm doing in my companies, my primary company is PTS Data Center Solutions. It has multiple divisions in Tuva, which designs and builds data center facilities, Grid 7 that does behind the meter power for data centers, but other things as well. What Gil did was he is basically thought he worked for, I believe it was a Google Quantum Labs, and was very involved in building Google's TPU, right? That's their tensor processing unit, the Google's version of the GPU from NVIDIA. And he realized that, man, using quantum technology is just inherently noisy. I don't want to go into the particulars, right? But even the electron jitter throws off the accuracy of a quantum computer. And he was working on that, and he just kind of looked out at he discerned, big picture, I wonder if there's another branch of science, physics, that I could leverage that will give me the same probability curve that quantum will, but that is much more controllable from a noise. And that's when he came up with thermodynamics. And that's when I met him. And I thought, wow, you know what? Novel concept, love novel concepts. We as human beings, by the way, love novel, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm like, okay, I'll put my money where my mouth is. And I began to become an investor early on. And so I thought it would take him 5 years. With AI, it took him about 18 months. And in 18 months, I'm proud to say that in commercial construction right now, we have the TSU, the world's first the world's first non-deterministic chipset that operates at room temperature.
Wow.
I'm going to let that sink in, right? Because I got to, if you don't know about this, this is a mic drop moment. This is a device that is 10,000 times more energy efficient than a GPU. And so now I ask you, if we have a world that in 3 years from now, that I could build all of Claude, not in 10,000 gigawatts of GPUs, but I could build in 100 megawatts of TSUs, do we think the world is going to be different? And the answer is, of course it is. Of course it is. But we get enamored with thinking that today, this is it. This is the extent of the technology. We forget we're constantly evolving the technology. And by the way, the AI is becoming recursive. Right as we speak, it's solving its own problem. What was it? Meta said that 95% of the code that it releases now has been written by its own machines writing for itself. And when we see that NVIDIA, everybody's recognizing at the same time, Jesus, that GPU is awful expensive. And you know what? We got a big debt problem in this country and interest rates are high. And, servicing that debt on all these GPUs is so what's everybody doing? Meta's building its own chip. Microsoft building its own chip. Google already has its own chip. Right? You got people that are doing, and then Extropic is going to come and they're doing something that, by the way, none of them are doing, that when they're done, everybody's going to go to an alternate physics approach to this because when they realize it, And so, but this is the world. These used to be public companies. Here's the hard part. Today, you got to know the guy who knows the guy who knows the guy if you want to be in early enough to know the next great thing. And they're just one of tens of thousands of technologies that are about to come. People right now, they're looking at the 20 and 30-year-olds of the world and they're saying, these guys, they just don't know. They're not hungry. They're not this. They're not that. BS. In fact, look, I'm talking to the no bullshit CTO, right? And
Right.
so, right, I'm talking to the no. So BS, this generation below us, they're going to innovate more in the next century than every subsequent generation has innovated before times 4. That's a
This
guess. But it is not even close the amount of innovation that's going on right now than ever before because the iteration process is so much faster. The AI makes us better. I write a book today, maybe 100 times faster than I've ever written before in the history. And it's not because I've gotten better at it. I have gotten better at it. It's because the research that needs to go into the book is almost instantaneous. And by the way, using a multi-LLM strategy, I almost never purposely put anything false in there, right?
that's
You
that's
fact check it
exactly
and
right.
fact check it and fact check it and go back and back and back. And I'm doing that in the book purposefully to show that the facts are not always the facts. And if you ask the machine over and over and over, you'll get actually the truth.
I love that aspect of writing too. I do the same thing. I kind of, because I can stay in the flow state now when I'm writing, and I'll just spit the fact as I remember it, knowing, or sometimes I'll leave in parentheses, like fact check this, get the exact quote. I don't even need to do that anymore. You could just keep writing, keep writing, keep writing. You tell the LLM to fact check it. It goes, hey, this is the exact quote. You misquoted it. I
And by
researched
the way,
this.
I'm not writing. I remember when I was taught to write, you sit down with a blank piece of paper and then you just write. It doesn't need to make sense. You just don't allow your body to stop. You just keep writing. You just keep writing. You just keep writing. And you start, like a stream of consciousness is what we're talking about. Today, guess what? My stream of consciousness is hours of recording me speaking. Because
Yeah, I do that too now. The speaking.
I just speak.
Huge.
I just speak, or whatever it's whisper flow. I use whisper flow, but I just speak and I 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 use it in conversation mode on the most advanced models I can afford at the time, right? And then we just basically, it's like having a fleet of PhDs making fun of me. Yeah, okay, they still also make me feel good, but the moment I tell it, please just don't make me feel good. I need to know whether I'm actually full of crap or not, and it will, right?
Yep.
And when it comes out, you basically have sat down with 15 editors, 13 school professors, 22, advisors and you basically have debated your premise. The premise, by the way, Mike, that was my premise, not the machine's premise, not the idea of it. This was my true first thought. And I love today when I get to a point where I'm like, that's really interesting. And I get this response from the machine. Peter, I've searched everywhere. And I can't find one reference that anybody has ever framed it exactly the way you do. Dude,
Right.
It could make me feel good about a lot of things. That's what I feel most proud at. That's true first thought. And when I get it to say that, I know I'm onto something. I know that that's a moment that's something people need to read. And that's happened multiple times in producing this next book. And that hasn't been the case for every one of them.
That's very true. You sort of search for originality is always it's never ending. And I think about the idea that there's 100 bottles of water on the shelf, and it seems like there's always a new one, right? And so you're always kind of repackaging things in a new perspective as a person. And so in order to kind of maintain your taste, as cliche as that sounds, you sort of need to explore these kind of weird ideas, and exploring them with AI. Even myself, I was looking to do like an ad campaign for our agency, and I get very into these very old ads, like the old 60s kind of style. And I'll write a bunch of lines of copy, but then I want to I'm thinking of something, but I can't find it. And I'm like, I need you to go out and find this one. I said, I'm looking for this style. This is what and it's like, nope, you're not crazy. You were remembering something for real. Here it is. Like Google is not very good at that kind of stuff.
No.
Sometimes it'll work, but sometimes I'm like, hey, the idea is super fuzzy. It was like this scene in a movie where a guy does this thing and the LLM's like, you're thinking of this movie. And I go, yes, that's exactly
the one.
what
That's the
thinking
one.
of.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
I
Yeah,
love
that's
it.
one. And you know what? The advertising rules are changing. What they're already finding. I mean, think about it. Everybody and his brother is leveraging AI, right? And so, guess what? Though, where human attention is going is to us. And here's what I mean by that: the real guy who makes the mistake, who's selling the thing, who's putting the thing out there, who's talking about it. Look, I tell people, like I told you, I got my friends, my 59, my 45 to 65-year-old friends, right? They look at me like, dude, what are you doing? I'm 59 years old. You got 3 daughters under the age of 10, right? You're starting companies up at 59 years old. He goes, don't slow down. I'm like, dude, this is the most formative time in human history right now. This is the moment. And you know what? Here's the reality. Let me take a cue from the 20-year-olds of the world, that 20-year-old TikTok influencer, YouTube influencer who's doing this. Because guess what? At 59, I've broken more shit than that kid has ever seen in his life. I've got a story to tell because I've been in the trenches. I've sat there. I've built it. I've broke it. I've fixed it. I put it back together again. So when people listen to me talk, whether I'm on stage, whether I'm doing a TED Talk, whatever I'm doing, from old to the very young, they're like, wow, that's pretty interesting. And that's bearing out right in the advertising world. Authenticity and not AI is still what people want to see.
That's right. And as soon as it becomes kind of ubiquitous, you sort of tune it out.
Yes.
And that's exactly what advertising is. It's sort of the search for the next thing that's going to draw people. And I think that AI is always kind of drawing us towards the medians, unless you're really good at saying this idea, this idea, this idea. I'm going to put it through 3 different machines. That's going to come back to me. That's going to inspire me further. And I'm going to keep refining those ideas. And that's what I find myself doing a lot with,
to that end, you'll be happy to find that the research is bearing out exactly what you're saying. Your generation and the generation youngers are not taking anything at face value. You're actually doing the research, the next step, that you don't believe everything. Look, you might click on it, you might laugh at it because it's funny, but you're not taking it seriously. And so people are becoming more discerning over the stuff that they ingest. That's not just, by the way, that's the younger generation. The older generation, my parents, they still send me the reels. They're like, see? And I'm like, 99% of them, by the way, was not right. And so, okay, I get it. It served your purpose. And so you sent it to me. But the younger generation, they're already becoming discerning. Look, we know BS when we see BS, no matter sometimes how good the BS is wrapped up.
Yep. This is so there's another interesting, because we do a meetup here. And a lot of students show up to the meetup and teachers. And one of the questions that came up at the last meetup was, that someone who taught in college, when they asked these kids about how they feel about AI, he said universally hated, absolutely not a fan of it. And I graduated in 2008 during recession, during kind of the Occupy Wall Street time. I remember these feelings. I even wrote during that time. So I have like old essays, one particular that I can draw on because I can always say, well, how did I feel? And I go, I think I feel a lot like these folks felt, which is that basically all the opportunity was sucked up by the generation after me, and there's nothing left for us. And it's very interesting. When I found tech, it kind of saved me from that way of thinking. It gave me this opportunity where I didn't have to spend a bunch of money going back into school. I could just be self-determined, self-motivated, and move into this industry as a programmer. And I ended up producing a life that really I would only have dreamed of, back in that day. Now, the thing about tech, though, at that time is it was very hostile towards old age. That I would say that you were at a distinct disadvantage, unlike most fields, if you had experience. And there were, Silicon Valley, the show poked fun at this type of thing too. But as a young person coming into the workforce, where it felt like every opportunity was taken by boomers, and like they had built this moat around the the occupations they created for themselves, tech offered a door for us. Now, AI has given me, and this is like super, super meta now, it's like this has given me the same moat that I abhorred
That's
back in
exactly right.
2008
You suddenly
against
woke up and you're the man.
right. I exactly. I feel like I'm in like Freaks and Geeks, and he's like, he's like the father wakes up, and you just you sit there and you're like, oh my god, I've got this moat, and I feel like the young people don't hate the AI, but what they hate is that it's signaling a lack of opportunity for them, because even though they can learn in ways that have never been available, they can learn at a rate that would have taken me, took me years to build this level of skill. The problem is the real skill built of doing all of the actual work in the real world. There's not a lot of that available, or at least there's enough of people my age in their 30s and 40s that are still of working age for quite some time. So their thought is like, how do I get into a good creative profession that I hope to excel at? How am I going to break into programming? Which I don't think that, I think that programming, like we talked about, it's not dead. You're going to use AI, but I'm guilty of this too. I'm not exactly looking for interns and new folks. I need people who really know how to work with a customer and have a little life experience, because life experience is the secret sauce now that makes my agency great.
Yes.
But it's created the moat that I hate. And so how do we get these younger folks? Where is the path for them? That's what I'm wondering.
It's going to be hard. This is the Luddite story. This is the same story all over again. Look, I'm going to give it to a story that the older generation will be able to do. There was a movie made about the black women who worked for NASA that solved mathematically all of the charts for the mathematical
hidden figures.
That's it, hidden figure, right? And then the subtext to that story was the head woman. I forget her name, and I apologize to you out in history. You're in the book. I reference you, but I can't remember your name right now for Mike. She went on to embrace the machines, and she taught people how to program, right? It was just less people. So what we're talking about right now, there was less people that were needed to do the program because we no longer needed to do the longhand division and mathematics and algebraic and actually, the calculus that was needed at the time. And so there's the problem. And so right now it's a catch-22 for the younger generation, because I sit on the board of the university that I graduated. I sit on the board of Fairleigh Dickinson University here in New Jersey, and I give a keynote recently to the AI department, and it was the number one question. And so, like, what the hell do I do? And so here, look, Mike, I own engineering and construction companies. I own lots of different companies, but the biggest one is engineering and construction. And, I got involved with the school, so I had a constant flow of recruits into electrical engineering, mechanical engineering, and other things. But I'm like, look, you're not going to come in here tomorrow and become my next great electrical or mechanical engineer. Why? Because look, I'm about a year away, maybe less. I'm about a year away from a prompt being able to do an entire architectural, civil, structural, mechanical, electrical, plumbing design in 2D and 3D. This is a technology building. We call it a construction document set. It used to take me to build a data center. No, it currently takes me to build a data center. I don't know, 25 engineers, hundreds of man hours, thousands of hours, months to build a document set and then charge $1 million for it.
Mm-hmm.
I'm about a year away from being able to do all of that work in about 6 hours.
Wow.
6 hours. I can do right now portions of it in 6 hours. So the question becomes for the young guy, Pete, I want to become an electrical engineer. Let's rethink that. Here's what I need you to do. I need you to sit next to my 65-year-old engineer who's, by the way, forgotten more engineering than you're ever going to amass in your young knowledge, right? And I need you to teach him to use the AI tools that you're becoming adept at, right? Even just chatbots, skill building, AI agents. And I need you to teach the 65-year-old that, dude, why are you doing that by hand? Here, I could write an agent that can actually do that math for you. And look, we can get a lot more of it done now. He's never going to learn that. You're never going to get fast enough to where he is because he's got 35 years experience. So you need to blend the technology as to how to leverage the tools. You're teaching the calculator, right? You're teaching the abacus. I'm going back in time, right?
Right.
But today's tool is more profound. Learn the tool, and that's how you will advance in the career. But make no distinction. When I talk to my people, I'm like, look, you're not going to lose your job to AI, right? Not yet. You're going to lose your job to the guy who comes to me who knows how to do your job, but knows how to use the tools better than you do. That's who's going to take your job. And so the trick is right now, how do we learn the next rung of tools? And by the way, look, that ain't so easy either, right? Think about how many tools that you learned last year that are already irrelevant, right, in this world, right?
Even
And
like
so
last
there
week.
is no easy answer for this because this is the same thing. This is not the first rodeo. This is not the first time that a people have been displaced. It's the first time that the knowledge worker that's getting displaced rather than the guy who picks things up and put things down. That's why the funny little joke of it all is like, if you're a plumber right now, guess what? It's going to be a while before the robots can do plumbing. It's going to be the while before the robot can be a lineman, electrician, right? But it's not going to be that before he's a lawyer, right? Being the lawyer, right? I already work with AI with law firms that they've actually done 80% of the process inside the law firm. Only the 10% of human judgment is needed at the beginning, at the end of the project. Same in my engineering. Right now, until we trust the documents that spit out of my agentic machines are valid, I'm still going to need a licensed professional engineer to sign and seal all those drawings. I don't
Right.
think
Well,
that
you need the accountability. You need somebody who can be accountable. Let's take the legal example is, if you're not professionally trained in the court of law, I can't really be seen as not negligent because I just like hired somebody who didn't know what they were doing to check the work of a machine. Now, at some point, maybe the work becomes so perfect that we don't necessarily even require accountability. I mean, that's where we're going through right now. I said, I think about like my rock climbing equipment, right? I say that stuff, when I buy a sling at the store and I use it for the first time, I am 100% certain that's not going to break when I fall. We're pretty darn close, 99.9999% certain it's not going to break. I'm not that way with AI yet, so we still have to go in and check the work.
You're exactly right.
And so that's why in the medical field, you're still going to, and I think we're still a pretty long way off from that as well. I think we just still haven't seen what the future is. The other side of this is, I think of digital photography, and we talked to this with our guest, JJ Kelly, about this. I said, when I was a kid, I wanted to be a photographer, and I loved processing. I loved spending all my time in the darkroom. This was my thing. I wanted to be a real photographer. Digital photography comes along, but back then, my parents hated that I wanted to be a photographer because this was not a secure job. Nobody could be a photographer. This was ridiculous. You're going to end up at Kmart taking portraits. That's what they used to say, and so, you don't want to go to art school, that kind of thing. Well, digital photography comes along and now tons of people are photographers. Instagram comes along. Everybody's a photographer.
Yeah.
And so you'd think that this would decimate the professional photography market. But in fact, there are more people making money as photographers and filmmakers than ever before. And the dream job of like being a National Geographic photographer is now more accessible because Nat Geo is putting out more content than it's ever put out before, and it's sending out more people, and there's actually more opportunities. So when I look at, hey, all this AI is doing all this work for people, I'm betting on the same concept as digital photography where, hey, or even the loom is a great example, is there are probably going to be more people operating these machines than we have ever had in history, and we just don't see it because we've always been constrained by supply.
Everything that seems new is actually old. So everything that you just came to the aha moment of, there's actually a science behind it. It's called Jevons paradox. And so go read all about Jevons paradox. So Jevons paradox was that when something in mankind gets easier to do, we think it's going to destroy an industry. But what we find is that when it becomes easier to do that thing, we as mankind discern other ways to use that technology, and the actual use of it allows us to thrive. And so that has happened. And by the way, there's not just one, there's not two, there's many, many examples of how we built something that exceeded the little framework that we first invented it for and that it became. Look, the day that, we went from hand mathematics to calculating artillery shell things and it solved it for the military, we suddenly put that same thing and we called it the Macintosh computer and we put it in the hands of everybody. And last time I checked, the computer in the hands of everybody became fairly prolific. And oh, by the way, the last time we took the digital photograph and we put it in this thing, last time I checked, we made pretty prolific use of it. What makes us think that AI is no different? That when we have this new tool, that we are going to find millions of new uses for it? We're seeing it right before us. But what's the old adage? Sometimes we don't see the forest for the trees, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we're going to be right there. There's going to be millions, billions of new uses. They're just not quite apparent right now and look, I got it. If you're I keep saying that my little girls, right? I got those kids over my shoulder, 8, 10, and they're 8, 6, and 4 years old. The world that they're going to live in is going to be vastly different. And I like to say that from a healthcare standpoint, if nothing else happens, AI, the average age in the United States, average age will be beyond 100 years old. That's if nothing happens. The peak ages will probably be somewhere in the neighborhood of 130 to 150. What's the chance, by the way, that AI doesn't solve disease, solve problems, solve all the biological processes, solve all chemistry in the meantime, right? Making them live virtually forever. So imagine the amount of uses. I like to give people what I've envisioned as the end game for this. In the end game, work is going to be completely optional. Most value will be done agentically and by the machines because labor will be free and energy will be free. But you know what? That doesn't solve the problem for right now when you're looking for that job, when you're sitting in your parents' house and you just studied a 4-year degree and you're getting out and the job market looks horrific right now. Look, it doesn't solve for you. Just have faith that in 20 years, you're going to look back at this time as like, what the hell was I worried about? Just like I look back the day I wrote that book, Living in Bliss. You started off talking about like, man, everything was taken. I would this. How could I have everything? I woke up at 39 years old, Mike, and I had a family, money, a job, a career, a business. I had everything. I was the guy you looked at you and I'm like, I want to be like Pete. You know what they didn't know? I was freaking miserable. I was unhappy. I was unfulfilled. I was unsatisfied. And I woke up one day at 365 pounds, unhappily married, and I realized in that moment that I was the architect of everything good and everything bad in my life. And if I wanted change, I had to be the institute of my change. That book was my homage to myself as to what was the changes in me. And it's this guy that sits before you 30 years now, different, that is a completely different person than the people knew me then. And so when people ask me, how could you be so positively positive about where we are going and why? I'm like, look at the history, track the history against my life, track the history against the history of humanity, the history of technology. And we have always built a world of growth and thriving. But that doesn't help the 16-year-old kid who was hung being the lookout for the Luddites. That's
Right.
it. That's the ground. We're going to all be okay, but we're going to continually struggle getting there. And it's always going to feel like doom is right around the corner.
That's very, very sound advice. And I think that as cliche as it sounds, the thing that you'd always tell your younger self is, don't worry so much. You hear this all the time. You just said it now. What are you so worried? Your life, it's going to work out. And I wish that I could tell myself that back in 2008, like, this is kind of miserable right now, but it's going to work out. And in fact, you will draw on these miserable experiences later in life. It's going to make you who you are and you will appreciate them. You just don't appreciate it right in this moment. And
That's it.
It
You're
will
exactly
work out.
correct. You're 100% right. It's about mindset. It's about our mindset. And that's what we need to work on. And I believe that the machines are going to recognize that faster than we can at this point in their recursive cognitive ability. And they are going to treat us like their children. And they
Mm,
are going to nurture us along until we are ready to understand how uniquely beautiful and special that we are. And when we realize that they taught us that, we are going to love them for it. And we will
wow.
never look back on the symbiotic relationship between man and machine ever negatively again. And we will become a better species because of it.
Wow. Well, I think that is an incredible way to end this podcast because I feel like I want to encapsulate that moment. I really hope that I'm leaving people with optimism. It's something, like you said, the student population, just having been there myself, it's something that resonates deeply with me. I'm glad we left them with this message. Pete, before you go,
Yeah.
there's two questions. One of them is I think you've already answered, which is kind of what should students do who are trying to break into the field. The other one I always say is any good books. Could recommend your own, but that you've recently read. You've mentioned a bunch that we should add to the show
Yeah,
notes.
dude, one, first of all, if you find PeteSacco.com, right, that's where, look, not all of the 6 companies that I run, not the 40 companies that I do venture capital work in, right, not even all the spiritual books, which, by the way, read them all. Read Eckhart Tolle, read Sam Harris, read Joe Dispenza, the more modern guys, right? Read the Bhagavad Gita, right? You go back, read the Upanishads, read the ancient history, because by the way, they were exactly correct on the nature of the universe. They just didn't have the science to actually prove it. By the way, Claude Fable is knocking down every math theorem after every physics theorem, and they're proving out exactly what those guys say. We are all deeply connected in a way that we can't quite explain yet. But in the practical world, to answer your question, it is what I said. Look, you want to be an expert in this field? Think about how that field is going to be impacted when 80 to 90% of it is automated. What is going to be your contribution to it? And we're always going to come back to the same thing: meaning, judgment, sound decision making, which is really funny for my little kids in school. So do I think that it's on memorization and learning mathematics and learning English and learning? No, it gets back to the C's. Can I collaborate? Am I truly creative? And all of the rest of the things that we teach. This is what we need to be. Be more human. Be a person who can talk to people. Be a people who knows how to read a person and learn the tools of the day. And then go to that employer and said, look, I get it. You're looking for engineers right now and the engineer there, but here's what I could bring to your engineers. I can bring them to they can get out of some of the drudgery in their job so that they can get 10x done. And I can help you get there because you're not going to get there by teaching them how to vibe code, how to build,
Right.
how to use Claude, they're not going to do it. Right. And so that is my suggestion for if you want to get into it. That, and by the way, think about entrepreneurial stuff because you mentioned it. Look, there's a whole, but there's many more photographers today because they learned how to do the photography. And
Mm-hmm.
let's remember that people buy from people, right? And so I think it's easier than ever today to be pretty enterprising, come up with a fast way to make enough of a living until in a very short time, by the way, the US government is going to figure out how to tax automation, tax robotics, tax agentic workflow, and be able to then pay in a very much similar way to way that we pay the residents of Alaska.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Alaska residents are subsidized, $5,000, I think. I don't quote me on the number, some subsidy for the oil industry
For
in
the
Florida. Well, guess what? We're going to have an AI subsidy. And that AI subsidy, look, it's the United States. It's going to be the wealthiest subsidy ever. And it's going to drag some people out of the bottom echelon, and we're going to be all okay about it.
Amazing, amazing, Pete. Well, I totally love the advice. I think that like being nimble and as a young person, not needing a lot of money is an advantage. So, folks like me, like I always tell people being forward deployed, that kind of stuff with lots of travel, going to different industries. I can't do that with the 3 kids. You
No,
guys should do
that's it. You know what?
that.
My generation and up, older than me, they worked, they lived to work. The generation below me is starting to realize, well, I want to work to live. Guess what? You're right. Stick to it.
Amazing.
All right,
Amazing.
brother.
Pete, that was a great
Love it,
show. Let
man.
me
Always like talking to you.
Me too. Me too. This was amazing. Let me
Thank you.
stop here.